Bill, that's me. That's my backup computer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I always have one just in case one computer kicks the bucket or I lose hardwire internet. I've got a backup to keep the meeting going. I don't know if it truly helps, but better to be prepared, right?
Yeah. Thought it was
Well,
maybe an R2D2 like creature.
I know. I think it's a computer that works on toll policy, so I'm a little worried about it. I've got a family to support, and I think it's pumping in on some things. So, thank you for your critiques of it, Dr. Wu. I'll pass those along to my superiors.
I think we should rename it Hal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even scarier.
Yeah. And have a big eye.
Well, you know what? Let's get going. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this Thursday, May 26th, 2022, for the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee, which includes the toll program projects, the I-205 toll project and the regional mobility pricing project. I am Jessica Stanton, your facilitator for today. And for myself and on behalf of ODOT, we wish to welcome you and say how much we appreciate your time and commitment to this process. So before we move forward, I invite us to pause for a moment in acknowledgement of the communities of Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas, for the people they lost this week, for their families, for their friends, and for the people who are living through an unfathomable loss at this time. Let's just send our tender thoughts for peace and healing to those communities. Next slide, please. For technical help, Nick is our go-to person. So please note his phone number and his email just in case you need it later. We will be recording the entire meeting. What you say here is part of the public record. The recording will be made available for the public next week. And to find more information about this project, please go to OregonTolling.org. And to our community members, we are happy that you are here. You are always welcome to email your public comments to us at oregontolling@odot.state.or.us. Please add committee public comment in the subject line. Let's take a moment to center ourselves. So find a comfortable position with your spine tall, your feet on the floor, and body relaxed. Just go ahead and take 2 fingers and tap lightly to the center of your forehead, right between your eyes. And then tap gently on your temples. And go ahead and release your hands in your lap. Take a gentle breath in and out. Close your eyes or softly gaze downward. Just notice your breath. Focus on the in and out. Quiet your mind. Be still and take a pause from everything. One gentle breath in and out. And then slowly open your eyes. And welcome back. Thank you again to everyone who is here with us today. As we move forward through our meeting, let's keep in mind the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee working together agreements from the committee's charter. Listen, believe, and reflect. Accept non-closure for the moment. Speak your own truth with compassion. Listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Value and celebrate each other's experiences. Open hearts plus open minds lead to exploration of possibilities. Make space, then take space, be concise. Bring your best thinking into the room. Attack the problem, not the person. Disagreement, frustration, and differences of opinion are acknowledged, explored, and addressed. Next slide. So our plan for today is to further the conversation around the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee's recommendations on topics of accountability, rate setting strategy, congestion management goals, and investing in disadvantaged minority and women-owned businesses. We'll also receive an update on the development of the low-income toll report, and then we'll listen and discuss public feedback. So our agenda today is to welcome everyone and talk about where we have been and where we're headed. And then, of course, take a lot of time to talk about the Emac draft recommendations and what our objectives are for the July 2022 meeting. And then we'll focus on equitable business investments. We'll have a Scuba team update, public comment, and then we'll close. So where we have been and where we are headed. Let's just take a moment to remind ourselves of the purpose of Emac. I love this slide because this is it. It is about the fact that the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee and the Oregon Transportation Commission have a common purpose to ensure that Oregon's toll program is equitable. So the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee is a group of individuals with professional and lived experience in equity and mobility. The mission is to support the goal of centering equity with the toll program by advising the OTC and ODOT on how the toll program can benefit communities who have been historically or are currently underrepresented or underserved by transportation. The OTC has asked Emac to provide recommendations and guidance on equitable tolling processes and outcomes. Specifically, Emac's charge is to provide input on strategies to address low-income impacts, neighborhood health and safety impacts, transit, and multimodal transportation options. Emac has spent 2 years plus identifying numerous policy and strategy options in these areas. Next slide, please. So let's talk about where we've been. During the last meeting, we talked about draft recommendations that included congestion and demand management. And we agreed to not define demand management and work towards agreement on outcomes. We also talked about accountability and involvement of equity voices. So we had more discussion about how the toll rate setting and adjustments process would involve those equity voices. We also talked about investing in small, minority, and women-owned businesses, bringing back the information on specific plans to do this. So where we have been was really having a long conversation about the draft recommendations. Next slide, please. So what we expect to do today is we will review the Emac recommendations on accountability, rate setting, congestion management goals, and investing in disadvantaged minority and women-owned businesses. So as part of this conversation, we will hear from ODOT and the OTC. We'll also receive an update from the Scuba team on the developments of the low-income toll report. And we'll also listen to and discuss public feedback. So all the while, we'll keep in mind the key milestone in July 2022 when the Emac members deliver their recommendations to the OTC. Next slide, please. So now let's hear about the status of the Emac recommendations. What is an overview of where we are in that process. Next slide, please. So this past month of May, the Emac Navigator spent a lot of time working through the following topics. They listened to and received and processed ODOT updates on the financial factors that are impacting the toll program and the process to set toll rates. They had multiple meetings to refine the draft recommendations language. There were meetings in person and then conversations online. They also shifted the approach on the toll revenue to provide direction to the toll rate setting process on priorities. And they also added more specificity on accountability. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to pass it over to Daniel Porter from ODOT, who's going to walk us through the toll program flow of funds and debt requirements. Over to you, Daniel.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody. Daniel Porter, I'm an ODOT finance manager, and as Jessica said, I'm going to walk you through at least a conceptual overview, kind of how flow of funds might work. this is something that we presented to the navigators, and I think it helped them kind of understand from ODOT's perspective, at least kind of the finance or realities of what we'd be facing as we move into a tolling program that may or may not have project construction associated with it that would require bonding. And so I think what I want to kind of start out with is just kind of give you a quick sense of what we're up against in terms of the tolling program and the projects. We have the moving into the I-205 Phase 1A project starting this summer, which would give us a seismic upgrade on the Abernathy Bridge. And there's the Rose Quarter project, there's the Interstate Bridge Replacement project, there's potentially Boom Bridge project, and all of these are big projects in themselves that will cost billions of dollars, and tolling is going to be like a primary source of funding for some of these projects. And when you tie tolling to a project, then what you're doing is you're saying we're going to take those toll revenues and we're going to borrow against those toll revenues, which will give us, essentially it's like your mortgage, right? And you're going to take some revenue now and then pay for the next 30 years or whatever. So when you do that, it's going to create a set of conditions because no one's going to lend you money unless they can guarantee that they're going to get paid back. So what this kind of flow of funds is kind of giving you is a sense of when you have those conditions and when you don't. And start at the top is the gross revenues. And this could be the regional mobility pricing program revenues, or it could be like our bridge kind of toll revenues, either way. But it's sort of this idea, this is the amount of revenue that you're supposed to be collecting. It's being assessed. And I noticed I have a little note there saying net of low income program. And that's a really key point here, is that whatever we decide to do in terms of developing this low income program, whether it's exemption, discount, credits, or all of those, that is money that is essentially that's coming off the top. It's not money, but it's coming off the top. Like that is not included in this toll revenue. So it's sort of the very first takeoff in a sense. So it's protected. It's the most protected, right? So it's not revenue that we actually ever even think about receiving. So it's the surest way of kind of doing this equity first kind of idea, that it's the very first kind of cut of the apple is up there. But then what you do collect, then you have people who don't pay, and so there's some leakage there, and then you have to pay for your operating expenses that are associated with the toll facility, whatever that is. And then you get to some sort of net. If you don't need that revenue to bond with, meaning if that revenue is if that is you're not gonna borrow against it, then at that point you probably get to an amount that you can just disperse, and it gets distributed however it's decided that money gets distributed. But if you're going to borrow against those funds, then there's going to be a set of, and I have in this thing, like 4 different categories of things that you're going to have to kind of set aside. And this is not a guarantee this is what it's going to look like, that this is illustrative of what it could look like, in the sense of like people who are going to lend us money are going to want to assure that they're going to have the amount that they need to get paid over the course of however long they get paid back, 30 years. So that's where this debt service and these other reserve funds come in. So that takes a big chunk, and then whatever's left over then is what's available for distribution. So on the projects where we are on the toll facilities or the toll programs that are tied to projects, 205 is going to be a great example of that, right? The Abernathy Bridges and the 12th and River Bridges. Those are tied to projects. Those revenues are going to be subject to this extra set of conditions. And so what's left over is going to be less than what you would do in, say, like maybe RMPP, where there isn't any identified projects, you can take the money and use it as a cash basis to do things with. So we presented this to the navigators group. Hopefully that helps kind of give you a sense of sort of how funds might flow through the process. And at the appropriate time, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments. And I'll pass it back to Jessica or Garrett or whoever's on next.
Over to Garrett. Thank you. Oh, I see Sharon's hand.
Yeah, excuse me. Help us understand where the mitigation that we have to do for NEPA fits into this scenario.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner. That actually will be another sort of off the top, because we will set aside a specific amount of toll revenues that will be dedicated to mitigation. So I wouldn't say it's right off the top, but it'll be up that sort of one of the top few that comes off before you get down to any sort of net income for operating expenses or anything like that. So it'll be, again, it's some sort of agreed upon amount, right? Or some sort of set aside that goes to mitigation.
And just to build on that, everything Daniel said is correct. And if it is a mitigation that can't be directly funded by tolling per the constitutional restriction, ODOT is still on the hook to provide that through other types of, other color of money. So know that mitigation, like Daniel was saying, is it's not a like, if we have the money, we will do it. We will be required to do it. And so whether that falls into this waterfall or through another source, that's, if it gets identified there, it has to happen. All right. Jessica, do you want me to jump into the?
Yes. Why don't you go to the next slide? Okay. And we can continue to take questions on this later during the discussion.
Excellent. So I'm here to report out on what was presented to the navigators and what Commissioner Smith and the OTC gave strategic direction on to ODOT staff at their May meeting. And so that is this process of where do we get from where we are now to setting the toll rates. And as you can see here on the screen, this gives you a pretty detailed schedule as far as some of the key steps in that process. And we're going to be talking about it a bit today because it's in your Emac recommendations, but the Rules Advisory Committee, or the RAC. And so that is a committee that, as you can see here, it'll be starting later this year. It has September circled on the map. And that RAC, this Rules Advisory Committee, will advise ODOT and the OTC on not just setting the toll rates for 205, but also the rulemaking that goes around it for items like enforcement, and then how tolling would actually work from like a customer service standpoint. And so as you can see here from that timeline, the RAC would begin later this year. They would work for about a year and a half to get draft rules, and then those draft rules would lead to kind of OTC adoption of the schedule, of the toll rate schedule. And then we do about 6 to 8 months of testing of the toll rates before tolls would actually go live before the end of 2024. And in the Emac game plan, we had envisioned where Emac would be receiving information and then providing recommendations to this RAC committee prior to them getting to that draft rule publishing in November. So you can see here the cadence we wanted to set up was where Emac would be probably providing a recommendation to the RAC sometime in mid-2023. Next slide. So there's a lot of questions because one of the kind of key tenets from the OTC, as you can see here on the bottom bullet point, and from ODOT was to continue the tolling program's commitment to equity. The other direction was to have this be a statewide effort because tolling impacts us all in every corner of Oregon and across our state lines. And that it should be small but broad representation. And that number they were kicking around at the committee was around 10 to 15 people. Next slide. So some of the major, and you've seen this in the different goals we're trying to balance with tolling, raising revenue, managing congestion, but also like Daniel said, kind of what comes off first, what comes off the top as far as the low income toll rate, and then meeting our climate and GHG reduction goals, that those are the four kind of balancing pillars of what happens and what will inform this from a strategic standpoint, this rate setting process. Next slide. And so this is just a very simple graphic, but it's meant to show the blue circles would be different toll rate schedules that you would choose. And so the real art of the committee will be to figure out what is the best toll rate of those blue circles to start with on I-205. And to clarify, when it refers to equitable revenue, it's just referring to revenue that starts as, like Daniel was saying, as everything that we could collect, but then includes a reduction based on the amount that would go into the low income toll program as far as credit, exemption, discount piece. So that's what is meant by equitable revenue on this slide. Next slide. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jessica.
Great. Thank you for that, Garrett. So now you've kind of gotten the context for what the navigators were talking about and processing in the month of May. Now let's move to the actual draft recommendations. Next slide, please. And to kick this off, I'm going to pass it over to Phil to go through our first slide.
Yep, thanks very much, Jessica. So, the committee has talked a lot about accountability in this whole process. And of course, Garrett just described the rate setting process, but this slide shows the relationship between Emac and RAC. The latter, of course, will actually be responsible for setting the toll rates themselves. This Venn diagram, if you will, has a significant overlap. And that overlap symbolizes the fact that both Emac and RAC share the principal goal of establishing an equitable toll rate. Next slide. And so, specific recommendations, there are 3 of them. The first is that RAC should include a current active Emac member at that moment and a former Emac member. The second recommendation is that the majority of the Rules Committee members should, in essence, mirror the diversity that we see on Emac. And this guarantees that there is a similar diversification of voices to inform RAC, just as we have on Emac itself. And then the third recommendation is that Emac should be provided the investment grade traffic and revenue analysis. And so with that, let me turn this over to Dwight for the next set of recommendations.
I'm off of mute. All right. That was a struggle there. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. And I think the next 2 slides just really kind of dovetail into what Phil has been talking about here. Here on the screen, this is designed to set the context for Emac's accountability recommendations. Emac and the Rules Advisory Committee, you'll hear referred to as RAC, will be convening from 2022, current year, through 2025. So, about 3 years. These committees will discuss and develop recommendations for setting toll rates for the I-205 and the I-5 projects from 2024 through 2025. In 2025, a new toll equity advisory committee will begin to focus on implementing equitable tolling processes and outcomes. So we'll go to the next slide. And finally, recommended action accountability. And so this is designed to continue to support an advisory committee to review, confirm, provide feedback, and help advance equity with tolling on the I-5 and I-205. Our establishing a preliminary vision for the committee. One of those visions is to monitor and evaluate ODOT's follow through on all Emac recommendations. Number two, to evaluate and measure the impact of the low income toll report. And finally, to measure equity outcomes over time in the following areas: workforce development and contracting, jobs, climate resiliency, enforcement, developing local leadership in communities. And I would say that these aren't in any order necessarily. I think they're all equally important to the process. And with that, I will turn it over to Bill.
Thank you. So our recommended action around revenue is that for I-5 and 205 toll projects, that we have the toll rate schedule as low as possible for everyone, especially for people including or experiencing low income. We'd like to carve out we would like to pursue a large carve out to support low income discounts, credits, and exemptions, and pursue a mix of investments such as major highway projects, project required mitigations that identify investments in transit and multimodal transportation options and address impacts of diversion on neighborhood health and safety, as well as ongoing funding for community-based organizations that serve equity populations. And then we move into congestion management. So decisions related to congestion management should be made with the following equity-oriented goals in mind: reduce congestion on highways while limiting diversion into local communities, improve access to job, healthcare services, education, recreation, and natural spaces, improve air quality that meets the target of greenhouse reduction goals, reduce vehicle miles traveled and increase mode shift, avoid disproportionate cost burdens on lower income populations, and price the system to maximize the efficiency of highways, emphasizing moving as many people as possible in existing lanes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Over to Chris.
Hey there. So our next recommended action is related to business investment. And specifically, I'll just read it out directly for you here. Tolling and investment must create more jobs for women, small and minority-owned businesses, and in equity communities. ODOT needs to identify and commit to a plan for the contracts for designing, building, and operating the toll system and projects supported by toll revenues.
Thank you, Chris. So now, and thank you, Phil and Dwight and Bill and Chris for those recommended actions. So now, having heard all of the Equity and Mobility Advisory recommended actions, let's get some feedback from their partners, the Oregon Transportation Commission and ODOT. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Commissioner Smith, and we'll move to the next slide.
Thank you, Jessica. So I've been following, the navigators group and reviewing the kind of the full draft of the recommendations. These are a summary of them. And in doing that, I just want to make sure that we have a collaborative process going between Emac and ODOT and the OTC so that there's a feedback loop and so that we don't go down our path without having that collaboration and making sure that we're all working together, working on the same page, and making sure that the ultimate recommendations that we make, that Emac makes, is consistent with the scope of the work that has been requested by the OTC, as well as, how does it fit within the rest of the tolling work plan going forward. So there were a couple of things that that I noticed in reviewing the language that I felt we should have some more dialogue with ODOT and talk a little bit more about how does that work? Is that where we are in the process? What are some of the maybe bookends for what the committee's role is in setting some of these policy recommendations. So that's sort of the backdrop of how we got to here. And I'll pass it back to Garrett to kind of walk through some of the feedback points. Happy to answer any questions the committee may have about how we got here, but let's hear from Garrett and then we can have a dialogue.
Yep, exactly. And just to build off what Commissioner Smith said, we're really trying to change the way that like committees and the OTC are done. You know, traditionally is you have a committee, it makes recommendations, and maybe some of them are taken up, some are not. We're really trying to, as you're developing the recommendations, also trying to get concurrence from the OTC and ODOT on these. So when we get to July, it's really a moment kind of of celebration and kind of coming together. And so as you're developing those recommendations, which a lot of these are just absolutely excellent and help provide the clarity that we need as far as what would that be, what should we prioritize for equity. There are a few pieces that, and maybe one that was kind of a sticking point, and others we'd like to continue the conversation on. So the first one we had a bit of a sticking point on was, and if it's in the document, it's on page 2, and it's the final bullet point under the recommended action for congestion management. But the first part of that sentence around pricing the system to maximize efficiency of the highway, we totally get, and I think that's our real goal with these toll projects. But the second sentence around highway lane expansion and how that should be, those decisions basically should be entered into or decided upon, gave us some concern around what is the impact to the future decision-making process and on the current projects that we're moving along. For example, the 3 current projects that Daniel talked about, the Boone Bridge, the Rose Corridor, and the Interstate Bridge, and I-205, so 4 projects, all of those have not been just decided upon by ODOT, but are actually adopted in the regional transportation plan as a metro and regional decision. And they do it all involve adding additional either auxiliary lanes or a 3rd lane in the I-205 case. So that kind of what's existing today, we had some concern because we do plan for tolling to pay for those regionally approved projects. But the idea of what should be done in addition to those, we saw as something really to be guided more by statewide policy, which ongoing here very soon will be an Oregon Highway Plan toll amendment, which is going to take up this very issue. And we can bring that kind of decision-making process and language back to you to weigh in on and provide feedback to us on whether that strikes the balance that you were trying to achieve. So that's the kind of the first main piece. And then the composition of the Rules Advisory Committee, again, love the kind of specificity on that. We just recently received the kind of strategic direction. So we're still in the process of developing the committee scope, charter, and what that membership would look like. And so I think the language around that, like a majority of the committee should be this, is something we need to continue to talk with you all about and work towards coming into more alignment in June. Just because we're still in the process of figuring out what types of rules will that committee be working on in addition to toll rate setting, to know what type of people we would want to bring in the room. And then again, I think we're spot on with the types of things that we will need monitoring and accountability for in the future once tolls are in place. I think we're just not at a place yet, though, where we want to commit to that it will be a committee that ODOT will support in perpetuity. And so we just want to continue to talk about what are ways, is it a committee, is it not a committee, or what are ways that we can achieve the types of outcomes that we're looking for in accountability. But would like to continue the conversation on whether it's an actual committee or not that ODOT supports. So I'll stop talking there, but that's just a few thoughts from ODOT, and I don't know if anything else, Commissioner Smith, you want to add on to that.
No, I think the only thing I would add is I think continuing the discussion on these points using the navigators with some of this feedback makes sense, and that, you know, we can bring back language before we make a final recommendation so that everybody is comfortable with the tweaks that may be suggested or recommended.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Garrett and Commissioner Smith. I think so. Now what we'd like to do is we'll move to the next screen and just take a quick look at our discussion question. Essentially, do the draft recommendations communicate Emac's objectives and intended outcomes? So you heard about what the navigators had learned about in May from ODOT and about the RAC and about the toll revenue flow. And then you also just heard the actual recommended actions from Emac. And then you also heard from OTC and ODOT where they'd like to continue the conversation. So with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and pull everybody back up on screen and talk about, we already got some hands up. Let's discuss what your thoughts are about the current recommendations. And I'll go with Michael first and then Phil.
Phil, I saw your hand went up before mine. Did you want to jump ahead of me?
My apologies.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I just had a very small little question. It was just a point of information, and that was who is going to be, I guess, creating that amendment?
Yeah, it's the Amanda Peets from ODOT in our planning division. There'll be, and I can send you the website we've set up to kind of gaining some feedback on it. But it'll be that planning division of ODOT who's working on that.
Okay, and that amendment is essentially going to, if I understood the comment correctly, is going to be also addressing how tolls will play into all of those other projects or potential future projects?
Yeah, it's a good clarification question. So the if you go into the Oregon Highway Plan today, it has a bunch of guidance on toll policies and how do you like when should we toll? How do we balance those different objectives of raising revenue and managing congestion? But the language was written back in 2012, and it's very different than how we're seeing it today. So I would say one of the main kind of pieces of this Oregon Highway Plan toll amendment will be to, if you remember on the slide where we had the 4 boxes of managing congestion, raising revenue, equitable or the low income toll, and the climate, it will help provide language to where, like, how should that rulemaking committee set numbers based on the policies that are in each one of those buckets. So it is an important document because it in policy should then guide the decisions towards toll rate setting. And it also will need to be, when these toll projects get complete through environmental review, they'll have to show how they're consistent with those policies that are established at the state level. So it is a key part of the process.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Over to Michael. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. There's so many good pieces here. So I'm really excited that we get to walk through it here bit by bit. But one of my concerns is still about where we've landed with revenues and how that will be allocated. And I understand that there's great complexity in making estimates and assumptions about revenues at this time. And there's obligations to bondholders as well, to that slide that we looked at. And so I think, we've talked about how we can help inform administrative rules and the RAC. But I think I still come back to sort of, I feel like there's a lack of security that we'll have enough funding for equitable multimodal investments that really give people the choice not to drive. And thinking through how are these multimodal investments that we spent a lot of time talking about, especially early on in our process, how is that, or can it be transparently communicated, and like, you know, can it really go beyond just NEPA mitigation minimums, you know, that would be required to a specific project? So it's kind of like taking it up just one level, looking at like our whole system holistically and thinking about like some of the parameters we do have, but like how does tolling and like pricing as a tool fit and interact with that. So that's kind of like, you know, where my mind is right now. And I know we talked about like some of those mitigation investments, you know, would be considered, you know, part of the project. So I guess my mind goes to like, you know, can some of those like fuller, you know, equitable multimodal investments, you know, all the things we've been like discussing about before, like, is there a way for that to be associated near the top as well, rather than at the bottom and, you know, to what's left over or what's maybe left over? I guess that's kind of like where my concerns are.
Garrett, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah,
Michael?
just a few thoughts. One, I mean, that's the nut we've been trying to crack, Michael, because part of it is like the way we've set up the process is we'd really like the environmental review and the NEPA study to help us to disclose all the impacts, and then from there figure out, okay, what do we need to mitigate that and advance equity, and know that it isn't like that everything is kicked down to that like final bucket of net toll revenue. So if it's, I'm thinking about like Nicole McDermott, who's on this call and is our project manager for 205. If there are sidewalk and bike infrastructure in, you know, downtown Oregon City or West Lynn that need to be committed to as mitigation with the project, it very well be that we include that with the bond of construction that goes out to pay for the 205 improvements as well. So it is one. So the financing piece of it, it could be where it is like solidly within that middle section of red. And so I think that's where we were working with you all this past month or so to figure out like, okay, what is that strategic direction on how much should be left over at the end of it, knowing that like if we try to grow the box at the top for a big carve out for low income, and then we try to grow the box at the bottom for net toll revenues, and we have a big box in the middle where we have to pay for capital, then that means a higher toll rate for everyone. And so that could be a possibility, but that was the trade-off we're trying to work through, and maybe just didn't land on the perfect language. So yeah, would love to keep talking about that.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate that. And I think that's probably where I guess I see that there's like opportunity in that we, you know, can use, you know, pricing as a way to, you know, address these things and kind of shift ourselves and our transportation system kind of away from like how things have always been, you know, done in the past. And so I think that like, you know, thinking about it in the I-205 context, like maybe there's some more barriers there because it's further along. But like when we think about like tolling holistically, like as a concept, I think it's, you know, worth it to push ourselves to think about like how is it adding to our multimodal system. I'll stop there and let others speak too. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And let's go to Dwight and then Phil.
Thank you. You know, I quickly figured out as we started this journey now almost 2 years ago that I'm certainly not an expert on tolling, but I'm trying to understand, and the way I do that, you know, is speaking with you know, folks that are that have something to say. And so listening is very important. And having met recently with my friends over in Clackamas County and wanting to hear what their opinions were, not surprisingly, they were very positive overall on the recommendations. There was one, however, under congestion management that they had some questions about. We kind of worked through it and developed what we believe is stronger language as it relates to investment in alternative modes of transportation, which I believe is going to be essential moving forward. And so I think I'm just right now going on record that I have submitted some language to Jessica that I'm hoping will be before the navigators next meeting. And if I need to be there to speak on it or present, it's a very friendly amendment, in an effort to try to make things better. Because you're either making things better or you're making things worse. And I'm always one that wants to make things better. So again, just wanted to go on record. I think the recommendations are something that we can all take pride in. It's a good body of work. And I think as we have these discussions, the points Michael has brought up and Phil and others, only seek to make it that much better. So kudos to all of you, and thank you for allowing me at least to be a small part of this group. So thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. And I will share Dwight's comments with the whole group right after the meeting. Let's go.
Jessica, real quick,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Would it be sort of beneficial for those of us that are in the room right now, just to kind of get like a high level from Dwight or from yourself on what those those recommendations are? Or is that best to be kind of dug into in the navigators meeting? I'm just wondering if it would contribute to the discussion here now. So no pressure either way.
I think one of the things we decided is that we didn't want to go too deep into language today because we wanted to bring out the concepts. But Dwight, I'm going to defer to you, and also Michael, some of the things that you said. Do you feel, Dwight, that there was overlap and supportive language for what Michael was talking about how using pricing and revenue to support the multimodalism, objectives that this group has explored? Do you feel like that's coming out in some of the language that you and your colleagues crafted?
I think it is, and it could certainly, based on some of what Michael is saying, certainly could be made stronger, even more strong. So no, I think we're all kind of fishing in the same pond, if you will. So I leave it up to you, Jessica. I mean, I don't seek to monopolize any of this. I never have. The navigators meeting, I think if that's the appropriate avenue for this, it's nothing earth shattering, folks. I know you're expecting, when Dwight has something that's earth shattering, it's not like bus on shoulder or anything like that. It's just a friendly amendment, if you will. So I will, defer back to you, Jessica, on that.
I'm going to put the friendly amendment in the chat for everyone to take a look at. And then we'll move to Phil and then Amanda. But thank you so much, Dwight.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'll try to be very brief. I just wanted to go back to what Michael was saying and something that I think I just want to highlight, which is, that whole revenue flow diagram to me seems to, just create a lot of if, ands, or buts. In other words, a lot of uncertainty because there are so many things that we don't necessarily know. And so it is hard to think about how we build in guarantees, or at least something that's more explicit and certain around certain goals. However, the thing that occurs to me is I don't know what transparency looks like when that whole revenue flow process proceeds. Who is going to see the evolution of all of those factors, and who will be able to weigh in when those factors start to happen and certain decisions have to be made about how revenue will be allocated? Is that going to be a closed box? Or is that going to be more of an open box that can involve, for example, whatever, I forget the name of it, whatever Emac number 2 looks like, or whatever the accountability process looks like?
Well, a few quick thoughts on that. More on the open box. This rules advisory committee meetings, we'll have a committee that kind of gets the review of it and as it's working through. But we do see a connection to Emac there. And we do see even in the Emac game plan that we've been setting up, that you all would receive that information. And then we would build into the schedule time where you could review it and then provide recommendations to that rules advisory committee prior to them kind of putting out that draft set of comments and rules and their final recommendation to the OTC. So yeah, more details to be worked out there, but know that, we are going to all the good, like communications, transparency, those pieces that you're seeing here with Emac, we see as being that continuation of commitment with that committee as well.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Phil. And let's go to Amanda.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I'm just looking at the Clackamas language, but we also had an opportunity to see some of their language, and I think that Washington County is in agreement with what they're proposing. If it makes more sense for me to try to come to the next navigators meeting to dive into that a little more, I'm happy to do that. I don't know when it is, but I'll see what I can do.
We would love to have you come to the meeting, and for those of you that can't come to the meeting, we'll be sure to share any updates to the language that the navigators are coming up with. So really, for the purpose of today, let's give direction to the navigators. And I think we're getting some good direction, right? So we're going to probably modify that last statement in the congestion management. We want to talk about alternate modes and what's that connection and relationship to pricing. So with that in mind, let's kind of give some kind of clear direction for what the navigators are going to be kind of locking down in terms of language in June. And feel free to add any language to the chat that you feel you want to see in the recommendations. All right, with that, I think I'll pivot to Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Jessica. I just wanted to respond, I think, to Michael and make sure that you feel that we are hearing. And what I heard you say is just some uncertainty that the equity goals will be reflected in the choices when we do things like mitigation and when we try and address diversion and promote alternative modes for people who are impacted by tolls. And I hear you. And it is, ODOT has not always in the past followed through on the commitments. And so there's a trust issue there. And I don't have an answer to your trust issue today, other than continuing to work with this committee. And I think the OTC is committed to it as an illustration, not as an answer. But in the last meeting, we allocated $20 million to a pilot program, innovative mobility project, that one of the goals of it will be to address folks impacted by diversion in this tolling community. Excuse me, I have another frog today. And is also targeting grants to community organizations, not doing things the way we have in the past. So we are trying to do things differently and just keep holding us accountable.
And just quickly to build off of that, Commissioner, oh, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I was just saying, thank you, I appreciate that.
And I think we were doing a brain meld because I put a link in the chat to that innovative mobility pilot program. And I know Park isn't here, but one of Park's major things has been the van pool, carpool investment. And honestly, the way this innovative mobility pilot program came from was input from this committee and parks advocacy. We were able to take that, provide that into the ODOT decision-making process around where to spend all these federal dollars. And that, like Commissioner Smith was saying, it started with $10 million and then it got bumped up to 20 million at this last OTC meeting. That is hitting a lot of the key things that you've said about investment in community organizations, bike share, van pool, carpool, prior to tolling even starting. So like Dwight's saying, with getting the smart service out there, getting service in place to where once tolling hits, in a best case scenario, people already are using these alternative transit modes or know about it. So like Commissioner Smith was saying, keep pushing us, keep forward in there. Know that like if it doesn't fall directly into the tolling waterfall, and if that's not where we exact those dollars from, we are trying to search as an agency to find where we can get those investments and meet the needs. Yep. So thank you.
So members, any other thoughts about some of the recommended actions? We've got input from OTC and ODOT about some of the concerns that they have, and then we've heard about really enhancing and really spotlighting multimodalism and maybe how pricing can affect a change in transportation behaviors. What else would you be looking for to direct the navigators to consider in finalizing the recommendations in June? Any other thoughts for the navigators? Are we feeling kind of like the recommendations are moving in the right direction? I see a head nod.
Yep.
Are they moving in the right direction? Michael, I'm not seeing your head move any direction at all. Thanks, Amanda. Thumbs up. Dwight? Bill? Great.
I was just gonna throw in that I think with some more work on some of the revenue pieces and comments there and recommendations there, I think we're getting there.
Okay, great. I think I just saw Chris's note in the chat that he heard that you would like, it sounds like you'd like to go beyond mitigation for revenue. Is that what we're hearing from you?
Yeah, I think to what Commissioner Smith was saying, I think you can do projects and see a list of mitigation needs and go through and check them. And I think in the past, my mind maybe goes to there's more diversion. So, maybe you need a wider road to increase capacity for turning vehicles or something like that. And so that's kind of I think some of the history that is sticky and I think about. And so it's really, I think about shifting when there's mitigation needs, and I think a really a more holistic system beyond just what is listed as a mitigation requirement for a project, I think it is really what I'm trying to get at. And I think in terms of delivering on those projects, I think it's to me, it feels like more than just striping a bike lane, on a large busy road. I think what we've talked about in the Emac early on is really a high quality, bike and walk facility, and, supporting transit, in any way we can, acknowledging the constitutional restriction. And so I think that's really what I'm, hoping we can get at, because I think then that really creates more opportunity for people, to be able to choose other modes, and we don't get into our cycle of always needing to rely on an automobile for all of our needs. So yeah, thank you, Chris, for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful, just because the way we were writing the revenue recommendation now would be more strategic direction for the rate setting. And I would say, Michael, what you're explaining would be more direction for our NEPA and our project teams and getting, and so I think that, you know, just if I could propose for the navigators, if we're, let's look at kind of what we have as already as kind of the marching orders, the preferred options from Emac for the project teams, because we have some really, like to your point, Michael, really specific requests that Emac wants to see in the toll projects. Because I think that's where that recommendation would land, a little more than just like strategic direction, you know, but if there is a strategic direction for what you're explaining, Michael, I would think I would want it, it would be helpful if it was more about that, the strategy of how aggressively or non-aggressively should we pursue that net toll revenue investment bucket. Because that's really what the rate setting committee is going to have to figure out, is like, if the direction from Emac is to try to keep the toll rates as low as possible for everyone, then you know, you're going to have to, like, you almost have like a ceiling. I'm putting my hands at an angle but like, so you almost have a ceiling or a cap on that. So your decision making then is within that cap. Where do we prioritize? So just a couple of thoughts there.
Thank you, Garrett. I thought I saw James's hand. Okay, John?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the recommendations again, and I didn't, you know, in the demand congestion management stuff, you guys aren't really talking about public transportation or alternative transportation methods. And I don't know if that is just because you don't see it landing in there, but I know we've talked a lot about that. And I worry that there's assumptions that aren't planned for. At least certainly we talked about all the assumptions of what public transit might be able to help accomplish. But I think when it comes to some of these statements and the recommendations, we might want to call it out more in terms of how this project is going to support that, because it's not like there's unused capacity ready to just, you know, support these potential new riders. So I just think we need some better language there. It's my hat.
Thank you, John. So better language in the congestion management around transit and other modes?
Yeah, other transportation options, right? So,
okay,
you know, recognizing some people might then start looking at other options, whether it's us or some other service, shuttle service. And I think, you know, someone had mentioned that. I don't know if it was Philip, no, it was someone else earlier on. I just think it should be a little bit more prevalent that, oh yeah, we are considering, or ODOT is considering these other things that will have to sort of step up or be available for this all to work.
Okay. Thank you. Why don't we move to Dwight?
Yeah, I agree with John. I think we shouldn't be shy about calling these things out specifically. And with that, you know, just kind of follow up on what Garrett was talking about, Park, and a couple of things that SMART is involved in. As you know, we talked about the I-205 shuttle, and we have that project fully funded at this point. SMART is working on procuring 4 vehicles for that service, and working with Clackamas County, Washington County Ride Connection. So we're moving forward, and that is the service that we talked about, you know, so that if we get it out there ahead of tolling, it, you know, tolling will be a no consequence. Also, what we've added recently, and this is just a recent add, is van pools, and that's where Park will be really happy. SMART will be starting up hopefully 6 van pools here in the next, you know, 30 to 90 days, working with employers here in Wilsonville, and I'm sure some of those vans will be utilizing the I-205. So again, just, you know, we're trying to do our part, and we actually have a meeting tomorrow morning with TriMet to talk about the I-205 corridor and what partnerships we might be able to form along that corridor between SMART and TriMet and Clackamas and Washington County. So that's going on tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. So exciting stuff going on, but it, you know, it's never going to be enough, folks. And so we need to keep pushing really, really hard on these recommendations. And again, I agree with John that if we call these things out, you know, people will hear us. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Dwight. And John, do you still have your hand up?
Nope.
Okay. Well, any other thoughts for our discussion around the draft recommendations and how we're the direction that we're providing for the navigators to finalize and lock in these recommendations in June? Go for it,
Sorry,
John. No problem.
I just really appreciate, I mean, I go through my emails from Jessica and from the other staff and everybody on this call. This has been a long process to get as close as we are. A ton of work. As someone who does staff committees and stuff, it's a ton of work. You guys have brought in the right experts and research, and it's even just looking at what other communities have done, so we didn't have to start from scratch. So it's very much appreciated. And maybe some of that is the late day meetings, but also the silence comes from the fact that you guys have inundated us with a lot of materials, good materials. And I as a staff who does this kind of work, I really appreciate it. So we're not there yet, but I feel like we're closer because of a lot of the work that everybody's done. So thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, you know what? I'm not hearing anyone wanting to give input. So this might be a perfect time to take our 5-minute break. Everyone want to take a break, get some water, and why don't we meet back here at 4:13. Was going to be 4:15, but I want to keep keep all the time in the meeting. So at 4:13, we're going to get going with the next segment of our meeting. So take a break, refresh yourselves. We'll be back at 4:13. Hello, it's 4:13. Welcome back, everyone. Let's move on to the next segment of our meeting. And Nicole, thank you. At this point, we'd like just welcome everyone back from the break. I hope you're all refreshed. And I would like to introduce Amber Ontiveros from Ontiveros and Associates, who is here to talk to us about the groundbreaking work she's been doing with ODOT on tolling and investing in disadvantaged, minority, and women-owned businesses. And while we get the PowerPoint slides up, they'll come up eventually. I would like to welcome Amber to our meeting. Amber, are you with us?
I am with you. Thank you so much.
Jessica, sorry to interrupt, Amber. So are you not sharing my slides? It says I'm sharing.
So sorry, Nicole. We're seeing your desktop, but not the slides.
Okay, strange. Let me stop and try again.
No worries. Just while Nicole is doing that, can everyone hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. So just by way of introduction, I'll provide a little bit of background on myself. So I'm actually a consultant for ODOT on the toll project, where I have worked with Chris and some of the other equity consultants on the equity framework that y'all worked on and refined and made absolutely fabulous. I also worked on the Rose Quarter project and helped develop the DBE and the workforce program. I used to work for TriMet, and then I worked for the Federal Highway Administration in FTA, where I worked on federal overseeing agencies' DBE programs as well. So the title of my presentation today is Tolling an Unexpected Ally for DBEs. And I want to address why I believe that at the end of the presentation. So if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So I can tell, given the nature of some of the questions, that you all are really interested in policymaking. And so I want to give you some background of the nature of the DBE program that I'm going to discuss today. So the key to the effectiveness of contracting for ODOT and ODOT's DBE program is essentially leveraging toll money with federal money that will enable them to create a DBE program. And some of the other work that I'm also doing is with ODOT is using change management approaches like what we did on the Rose Quarter and other work within the agency to improve their overall contracting administration. So the thing that's pretty interesting about the tolling DBE program is they're looking for, this will look at opportunities from a range of opportunities, from everything from professional services to contracting. So, and it'll be everything from administering the toll program to the actual contracts or construction work for, like, for example, Michael, you talked about mitigation. So those kinds of things. And right now, my preliminary estimates for the amount of opportunities are right around 300 million. If you can go to the next slide. The reason why I say it's around 300 million is because some of these projects are currently they haven't even begun. They're in preliminary stages of NEPA. And so therefore we don't have the actual dollar amount or the goal set so that I could tell you the actual estimates of the dollars of opportunities. But this just gives you a range of some of the opportunities and projects that may be funded with toll revenue. So I talked a little bit about the Rose Quarter and I-205. And those are some of the innovations that you're going to see throughout. If you can then go to the next slide. So the program is essentially each project. So you saw a list of projects. Each project, the DBE program, will be unique and tailored to each project, depending on the type of procurement activity and depending on the scopes of works. So, for example, the Rose Quarter project uses a alternative delivery procurement method which is called CMGC. And I know John from TriMet is very familiar with that type of technique because TriMet uses it all the time. Essentially, it's a very unique method that gives a lot of flexibility to the prime to create innovations. So the I-205 project is not that type of procurement method. It's another one. However, some of the strategies that you're going to see are everything from outreach, beginning where the project is being developed, to actual operations of the toll program. So, for example, also using innovative procurement techniques and strategies like a diversity plan, which includes an array of tools that the prime and the agency can use to create a really robust program. So on Rose Quarter, we used a diversity plan. And then on I-205, they used a diversity plan light, or a lighter version of a much more robust program. But it depends on the type of procurement for each project. Next slide, please. So of course, all of these projects are going to have race-conscious goals, which are hard goals to remedy past harm. And recently, ODOT conducted a disparity study, and I'm really excited about the outcome of that study because it increased ODOT's goals to 23%. And I know TriMet is used to a goal as significant as that, but I'm really excited about the fact that ODOT has done the work and now is increasing their goals. The other thing is there is also a prompt pay program that is being implemented for professional services. And they're also looking at a quick pay type of program to pay contractors and professional services firms in a much quicker way to offset the cash flow issues that we as small businesses have. So the other thing is, when you're a small business, you want to look for an array of types of services that you offer so that you're not putting all of your eggs in one basket. And so this will do that because it's an array of services, new types of professional services, scopes that ODOT has never done before. And the other thing is, like the mentor protege program for the Rose Quarter, those types of techniques and tools can be used on other projects. Next slide. Okay, so I want to answer the question about why an unexpected ally. So the thing that has resulted, and I would say this to you, Michael, and to some of the other members, that you're asking these questions is key to the change management approach that is resulting from the questions that you're asking. And so what we are seeing is that as a result of some of the successes for Rose Quarters, some of those same types of successes are then being used on I-205. And those types of successes are then being integrated throughout the overall approach for the way that the toll projects are being administered. So for example, you see that the procurement method on one is then parts of it are being snapped up on another. The other thing is that's really cool is that for tolling, now we are going to be engaging DBEs in the way that they have told ODOT that they want to be engaged, which is they want to get communication via email because they're out in the field. They want text because they're out on the construction site. We read social media just as well, and we want to get information from our community through our community-based organizations, which is something that you have said. And so I just say and ask you to continue to do that because it makes the overall program as effective. And then the last thing that I would say is this is going to enable us to create a pipeline of work to inform DBEs about all of these other mega projects for which toll could potentially fund. And so I met with one of the construction managers today. And so we will be working on how to administer and how to provide updates as it relates to this to you and to other DBEs. So with that, I will entertain any questions.
Thank you, Amber. You know what? Why don't we go ahead and pull the slides down and yeah, any questions for that great presentation from Amber?
I'm really excited about all of the work that you're doing. One of the things I just wanted to also say is that you know, I'll also be coming back and talking to you about workforce because DBEs are the companies, and then there are the workers that work for the companies. And we're essentially it's like a threefer because you know, we have opportunities for the DBEs, and then on I-205, for example, they're going to be using a local preference workforce program, which allows them to use specific zip codes targeting low-income individuals on that workforce. So anyways, it's really exciting.
I think John had his hand up.
John?
Hey, Amber. Yeah, I tried to give you a shout out at the beginning. So, I mean, folks don't know Amber. One of the things that I've enjoyed and since coming to TriMet is it's long since established a reputation of contracting with minority women-owned firms. Like it's an industry leader. And a lot of that happened when Amber was on the clock and on the job. So a lot of the DBE stuff gets very technical very quickly in terms of different softwares to track utilization and workforce and make sure folks are being paid their wages, and as well as that contractors are actually passing through and signing up and contracting with folks. But I mean, the fact that ODOT's taken this step is a big deal. I mean, like many other public agencies, ODOT has struggled to sort of meet these goals. So 20% is a huge goal. And I think if you unpack disadvantaged business, it really means new minority-owned, women-owned firms when you really get into it that are, you know, historically underrepresented African-American, Latino firms. So it's very exciting. And I'm just so glad that ODOT has a champion and just an expert like Amber. So thank you for being part of the project, Amber.
Oh, thanks, John.
James?
Hi, I'm going to put my hand down before I forget. Amber, I think you did a wonderful job and doing wonderful work, just like John said. And having had the opportunity to work with John in the past when he was with Work Systems, where I'm the board chair, the other piece to this is really looking at the pipeline. And, you know, the pipeline starts with someone working in the trades, realizing that they want to move up from, you know, just doing their job to being able to start their own business, so that we do have these women and minority owned businesses that are going to be able to take advantage of these funds that you're fighting so hard to get into these communities. So keep doing that good work, and we just need to keep trying to build that pipeline. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I fully agree with you. And one of the things that we did on Rose Quarter, and I'm really interested doing elsewhere, is we did a series of success stories where we featured not just contractors, but workers, because we get young people excited about the innovation, about, oh my gosh, I'm 19 years old. I can graduate and start making $60,000 a year. I mean, you don't need to go to college to make a really exceptional wage. And that's the thing that we need to start communicating. So thank you. I will.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who are 32 years old and they could get into it as well. It's never too late.
It's never too late. Absolutely. So I just would say thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll be back to provide you with updates. And I know you had indicated that you wanted accountability measures. And, you know, John knows me. That's what I do. So I'll be back.
Thank you so much, Amber. So members, with the additional information that you heard from the work that Amber is doing and this conversation, are there any other changes that you would like to think about and consider in finalizing the recommendations before you submit them in June?
Would it be helpful for me to include the PowerPoint in the chat for the Yes.
The PowerPoint, your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Actually, we've given them the presentation, so they have a copy of it. But if you want to put in your contact information, Amber, if they have, additional questions. So members, any other changes needed to finalize the recommendations before the submission in June? Okay. Well, then I think what we're going to do, let's review what we talked about today. And what we'd like to do is give direction to the navigators in June for what they're going to do in June to finalize the recommendations. So here are some of the things I've heard. So let me know what we need to look at or what direction we're going to give the navigators. So one of the things was review revenue and how is it incentivizing a healthier transportation system to use alternate modes of transportation, transit, carpool, vanpool, and including thinking of revenue beyond the revenue that's going towards mitigation. So that was one update that I heard about. And then I also heard regarding congestion management, perhaps consider eliminating the direction about expanding highways and rethinking how Emac wants to talk about congestion management, and perhaps consider what Dwight and team developed about investing in alternate modes. So those are the three things that I heard about. I also want to just make sure that we would be taking into consideration what ODOT and OTC's feedback is. So that's the direction that we would give the navigators going into June. Is there anything that I'm missing? Michael.
Thanks, Jessica. I think that's a great summary. And I think one piece that came up in conversation that I think we should revisit is in the recommendations under revenue. There's the comment about, pursue a toll rate schedule that is as low as possible for everyone, especially for people experiencing low incomes. I think that could be teased out a little bit more, at least from my perspective. Like, I think that toll rate should really be informed by demand, and like how many, like we talked about using the highway system efficiently, and so having that toll rate be influenced by how many people are trying to use that system but really recognizing and protecting low-income drivers. And so I that's kind of like some of my thoughts on that. I'm curious if other people have more thoughts on that, or if that's something that we take to the navigator space for discussion based on time and things.
Garrett, we'll get to you in a moment. Members, do you have any feedback for Michael? Do you kind of agree that we need to focus in on that a little more? Are you in agreement with Michael to look at that in the navigators? I see a head nod. Amanda? Okay. All right. Well,
I think there's some nuances that we should build into that recommendation. I'm not exactly sure what they are at this moment, but yeah, I would agree with Michael. There needs to be some qualification to that.
Excellent. Okay, we'll add that to the navigator's direction then. Thank you. So now we'll go to Garrett.
Yeah, and I think the just the other two things, continuing the conversation on like the composition of the Rules Advisory Committee, and I know we were trying to guard against the situation where there are like token equity members that are put on a committee where there's just 2 seats out of 15, and that really it gets overpowered by, you know, the established voices that show up to these committees on a pretty routine basis. So we also are trying to avoid that. I don't know, you know, we couldn't land on the language of agreeing to the full of the majority and how that was written. So that's just something we need to talk about some more, and then continue with the conversation on that committee structure of once toll rates are in place and beyond, and what that looks like. I think we're pretty close, if not there, on the outcomes that we want to get to and the things we want to monitor and make sure that those are informing adjustments to the toll rate or to making sure we're living out our commitments to equity we made kind of pre-toll rates. But just figuring out what is the actual like structure of who oversees that and who is on that committee is something we need to talk about some more.
Excellent. Thank you, Garrett. So with all of those, that great direction for the navigators, just would like to know, are we, if we make those updates in June, are we in about the 80% range of finalizing the recommendations? I see a head nod. Let's just do a head nod vote. And so if you can nod your head. I see a nodded head. Do we have any?
It's a bunch of bobbleheads
that you've done, Jessica.
Right.
Because there's a sideways head nod, maybe that's a somewhat. What's a
right.
no head nod?
Right.
Just
so this is a tilt up and down. Okay.
Tilt up and down is positive. Okay.
Yes. Okay. I'm seeing head nods. Do we have any twisty no head nods? Or yeah. Do we have any no's? Michael.
I think that we need to keep working on that, like that revenue piece there, and that, you know, that would really help me get there. That's the part where I'm really like twisting my head because I'm not sure how to like nod with that. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, so with those notes, I think we've got direction for the navigators, unless anyone else wants to add anything. And I hope as many of you as possible can come to the navigators meeting. The first one will be the week of June 6th. So keep an eye out for that. All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and move on to our next segment of the meeting, which is the Scuba team update. And for this, I'm going to pass it over to Garrett.
Yeah, excellent. And I did collect bobbleheads growing up, so I have been imagining getting printed, your faces printed on bobbleheads, so we can have a collector set for Emac. So that might come out of that innovative mobility fund. All right, so the Scuba team impact, Scuba team update. Again, the Scuba team kind of is our deep dive into the environmental review documents, and really kind of dives into the technical information to make sure we're living out equity in those very specific ways. So next slide. So the deep dive this month was on the low income toll report, which will be coming out for like larger public review in later June, early July. And that will be headed then towards the Oregon Transportation Commission for September, for their September meeting there. And so the update was one, there's been a bunch of community surveys out and people have been doing an awesome job interacting with those. We have over 12,000 responses, which is much far surpassing previous surveys. And really we're seeing definitely a strong, responding from people in the Clackamas area, because we can understand that's kind of the first place where tolling would start. But we were really impressed by the responses we got from East County and Gresham, and then the west side of the region, all the way up through like Beaverton, Tigard area, and then across the river over in Vancouver and up into Clark County. And some of the questions we're receiving, kind of some of the feedback, and we did discussion groups as well, is to whatever gets committed to for as far as this discount exemption, low income toll program, really make it as simple as possible. And work with community organizations to help get people access to that. And if at all possible, try, if somebody has like SNAP benefits or Oregon Health Plan or is already receiving those, try to make it as easy as possible, as if they sign up for that, they also can get the whatever ODOT commits to for this low income toll program. And then some of the key things we're still working on now, but just some of the initial findings we were able to share with the committee was around what is that income threshold. We're liking that idea around 200% of the federal poverty level. And we can run some of the numbers on that, but just for example, that's around $53,000 for a family of four. So still pretty low, and I'm just imagining trying to survive on that and pay for housing and all the other costs in the region. And so that would be we like that level, because that threshold, you can also qualify for a lot of those other programs. So it'd make it very easy to sign up. And then we're also looking at maybe like 400% of the federal poverty level, and maybe having a smaller benefit, but one that is more specific to people who make just above that line, but are still on a fixed wage or, service working and have to do a lot of travel around the region, where tolling would be, because of housing now, you have to drive to basically afford housing. And so that cost goes higher and higher. So there's just initial pieces. We're still in the analysis process of running that on the tolling system to figure out, okay, well, what would that mean for revenue? How much revenue would that take away if you committed to either a full exemption or a 50% discount, or provided a $25 credit a month? And then what does that do also to congestion management and to that the mode shift and the other goals that we've talked about before? So the feedback from the Scuba team was absolutely awesome. It seemed like people did that. The idea of simple is good, but if we need to do multiple tiers to meet those two audiences, we're good with that. We love the idea of like where it would be self-certifying or a way that ODOT could use other agencies to certify. So ODOT wouldn't have to have a lot of their own paperwork, and it would be more onerous on people who would be applying. And then there was a third point I wanted to get to before. So no, I think those were the main two pieces there. And then we had this absolutely wonderful discussion, which I've been working on justice issues for a couple decades now. And it's the eternal debate over what is more equitable. Is it the full free exemption and trip? And the argument for that would be, well, look at the system today. People of low income pay predominantly higher amounts of the gas tax than middle and upper income. And so if we're adding tolling onto this, would equity be free? Should that be the most equitable piece? Or is this a system where in setting up social service programs, everybody should pay an amount to kind of have that responsibility piece that everybody is chipping in on this piece? and should it be so should for that 200% of the poverty level, should they at least pay a little bit, maybe 10% of what other people of higher incomes would pay? And the argument for that would be one, from that just personal responsibility piece, that everybody's a part of this system. It's not just a handout. And then two, it would be if we are just providing free trips for people who drive, what does that do to our goals for vehicle miles traveled and mode shift and greenhouse gas reduction? So it's a wonderful debate. I don't think we're going to solve it here in the this low income toll report, but it's a great way to show that these are really complex issues. There's trade-offs, and we're hoping to get to this September a decision for the Oregon Transportation Commission that maybe doesn't solve all of those questions, but definitely pushes the ball further down the field. So then when we do enter the rate setting and get that really detailed traffic and revenue analysis, we would definitely know what the full cost would be. So I'll stop talking now, but that's a little report out of the Scuba team. I don't know if other Scuba team members want to add on to anything I had to say or edit it and say I was totally wrong, but I'll be open for that.
Any Scuba additional thoughts? And then the next question would be, do you have any comments or questions to add to the Scuba team's input? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Garrett. That was a great update. I'm hearing no questions and not seeing any hands. Just one more pause in case someone wants to add into this discussion about Scuba update. Ah, I see Eduardo's hand.
Thank you. I just want to state for the record that this low income addressing on people's wallets was a top priority in applying to serve on this committee. So been pretty enthusiastic of the work that my colleagues have put forward, and considering the affordable capital A and affordable lowercase a, I think we often forget of those income earners in the middle that also experience living paycheck to paycheck, or, if there's a major car repair or healthcare bill that comes to the table, or sending a kid off to college, it really creates instability. So yes, there are the high income earners and then our most vulnerable low income. But I think we're doing a good job bringing attention to the people in the middle, especially in these times of economic uncertainty that people feel. So thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. And I see James's hand.
Thanks for that, Eduardo. That is exactly what we are very focused on now that we're kind of moving more into, some more nuts and bolts and actual numbers and that sort of thing. Because, and Garrett pointed it out, a family of four on, $54,000 in, this metro area, that is extremely challenging. Because when you look at the people that we're really trying to address with supporting them in discounted tolls, when you look at somebody who is working paycheck to paycheck, somebody who is making, minimum wage, $15, $16 an hour, paying a toll makes a difference on going to work. Paying a toll makes it difficult to get your kid to childcare. And so we really are looking at that. We're looking at the number of uses that people have to do in their normal life. And then we're balancing that against some of the goals that we're looking toward as far as trying to reduce congestion, reduce the greenhouse gas effects, and to reduce vehicle miles traveled with single occupancy vehicles. So there's a lot of balls in the air, but I think underlying it all is just exactly what you said, is that this system shouldn't penalize the people who don't make high incomes. So thank you for that input.
And just my one quick add, I just remembered. So Eduardo, you reminded me. So we talked a lot about the federal poverty level, but we have truth checked that against a couple of measures, the Alice income and Oregon self-sufficiency, that are trying to account for more of what is the full living wage cost that you need here in the Portland metro region. And so the reason why we're looking at those federal poverty line at 200 and 400% is because those capture pretty well at the 200% level, kind of what the those other measures that are a better capture of overall cost say that should be at least the kind of your baseline for capturing need. So.
Thank you, Garrett. Any other thoughts, members? Okay, let's move on to our public comment and discussion. So I just wanted to give a friendly reminder that the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee has been charged with defining equitable processes and outcomes for the tolling program. They are an advisory body with no decision-making authority about whether to toll or not toll. And it has been my experience with these members that they listen attentively and care about all of the public comments. So with all that said, we very much welcome members of the public to come and share their thoughts with us. So again, welcome members of the public. Oh, Nick, do we have no members of the public?
We do, yep.
Oh, okay, great.
The first person up is going to be Chris Smith. Chris, I'm going to give you the ability to unmute yourself, and you'll have the option to start talking any second now. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Chris Smith with the No More Freeways campaign, and very supportive of defining some kind of low-income program with tolling. What I'd like to ask is that you consider making any benefit you define multimodal. So you can certainly understand why you may want to give discounts or exemptions to tolling, but we should also be providing people options to use transit. TriMet has a low-income program, but if you could make it one-stop shopping with the toll benefit and the transit benefit, that would be great. And I'd love to see you think outside the box. So for example, maybe what some household needs is help buying an e-bike as an alternative to driving. I would really hope that whatever you do as a low-income benefit doesn't just keep locking people into driving, but gives them other options to use other modes. And really the choice should be the households. We shouldn't be imposing that on them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Nick, do we have another speaker for us today?
Give it another second or two for members of the public to raise your virtual hand so we can call on you. Not right now, Jessica.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chris. And if there are any other members of the public that would like to speak while we're meeting today, please raise your hand and let us know. All right. Well, is there anything you are hearing from your communities or in the public comments that you would like to discuss, members? Or do you have any questions about from ODOT, about their toll project updates? So we can just use this time to talk about project updates or for you to share what you're hearing from your communities. Maybe Dwight, you want to share a little bit from what you've been hearing?
Yeah. It, working with, I was contacted by some folks over in Clackamas County that were, very concerned about, obviously, the impact of tolling and diversion and all of those things. And through a couple of meetings and really, as I said earlier, listening, I was able to glean, where they were coming from, and I think through those discussions, we both gained a better understanding, and worked through some language, and I think in the end, what they came to realize is that they did have a voice. We are listening, and I hope others are having a similar experience with the groups that they're working with. Sometimes if you make yourself available, they'll find you. They'll search you out. And I know this has been, when we read the public comments, the emails that Jessica, I think she sends them to us just to keep us, humble. We find out, how people feel about this thing. And, it's hard sometimes when you aren't on the side of something that's very popular. If we were giving away $100 bills, people would love us, right? And so we're not, but, I'm proud of the work that we continue to do. And so sometimes facing the public, in this case, isn't as scary as it may seem. You just have to be open to it and understand, where they're coming from. Don't dig in to your opinions, just listen. You'd be surprised how much you have in common, because everybody's concerned about climate and congestion. And this is one of those tools, not the only tool, but I think it's an effective tool for dealing with the things that we all lose sleep over at night. And so, it's been working with the folks in Clackamas County has been a really, really good experience for me. So thanks for the opportunity, Jess.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Dwight. And any other comments, members, about what's going on in your communities or feedback for Dwight? Okay, then let's go ahead and close our meeting. So our next steps, we have an Emac meeting in June, on June 22nd, possibly. We will we'll reach out to you in the next week about details for that meeting. We will also be having future Emac sub-team meetings in June. So keep an eye out for navigators meetings and another Scuba team meeting. And if you can please fill out your meeting evaluation to help us continuously improve how we're running these meetings, we would be most grateful. We do have a minute before we close. I just want to open up the floor to anyone that might have a closing thought for how our meeting went today, or what you're thinking about is going to happen in June, or why Emac matters. Anyone want to take the floor and give a closing thought? Commissioner Smith.
Thank you, Jessica. I think Emac matters a lot. And as we've heard today, Michael's comments resonate with me, that we, if ODOT is trying to do things differently, we need to hear the voices of folks that we haven't listened to in the past. And so this allows us to listen. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Commissioner Smith. Anyone else? We have another minute. Want to offer a thought? We are interestingly quiet today. It's kind of cool. All right, with that, why don't we just go ahead and give you back 3 minutes of your day. We're so grateful that you came today, another amazing conversation, and we would love to see all of you attend those sub-team meetings in June so we can really wrap up the recommendations in the way that you intend and want to see them delivered. All right, have a great evening, and thank you so much for your time today.